Hey YouTube, it's your girl Dr. J, and I am participating in this month's Gifted Homeschoolers Forum vlog hop, and our topic for this month is the depth and breadth of gifted. And what I wanted to talk about with this topic was what it's like homeschooling twice exceptional or 2E children. When I started my channel a few years ago, that was really one of the driving forces behind me starting my channel, was to really show people what this experience was like, because I didn't see a lot of information out there about what it was like, homeschooling twice exceptional children, and how for us it was a driving factor in us having a STEM-based homeschool. And after I started the channel and put some things out there, I realized why there's not a lot out there on twice exceptional children, and that's because parents of twice exceptional children are hiding, and they're hiding with good reason. A lot of that reason is because there is such a misunderstanding of what it means to be twice exceptional. I've had people tell me directly, and then I've also heard from other people how people will say, Dr. J, her kids aren't gifted. How can you be gifted and be dyslexic? That's impossible. Them kids ain't smart. She just saying it. She just think that. How can you be gifted and your child have problems writing? Whatever. They're not gifted. She just saying it. Her kids ain't all that. Now, first, gifted doesn't mean your kids are all that. Anyway, so gifted does not and has never meant that your children know everything, or that they're the smartest, or that they're the fastest, or that they're the bestest. That's not what gifted even means. It's how your children process information, how they interact with the world around them. There's a whole package of things that come with gifted, but a guarantee of being the valedictorian or having a perfect score on the SAT is not one of those things that come with the package of being gifted. So part of it is a misunderstanding of gifted, but another part of it is a misunderstanding of duality. And duality is really about being more than one thing at the same time. And it's kind of the same thing that happens with people that have other areas of duality. One of my favorite lines from one of my favorite movies, which was Queen, Alex Haley's Queen. And in it, Queen, who was half white and half black, she was accused of trying to pass as black. And in the movie, she says, I ain't trying to pass for black, because I is black. And I ain't trying to pass for white, because I is white. And that is the reality of twice exceptional children as well. They aren't trying to pass as gifted. They are gifted. And they're not trying to pass as having a learning disability. They do have a learning disability. They have both those things, those real things that are really happening at the same time. The problem is that society is not as accepting of duality. I mean, just like, again, people that I know who are more than one race, they will talk about how frustrating it is to always be asked to be, pick a box. Are you black? Or are you white? Are you Mexican? Are you, Asian? What are you really? And that's what happens with gifted children that also have a learning disability, or twice exceptional children. They're oftentimes asked to choose. Are you gifted or do you have a learning disability? Pick a line. And with twice exceptional, it doesn't work like that. There's no line. They are both things at the same time. And while we can all moan about the label of gifted, most people hate the label of gifted. I included hate the term gifted. I think that kids are gifted. I definitely acknowledge that children and adults are gifted, but I wish that when giftedness was first brought on the scene, all those years ago that they had chose a word other than gifted to describe it. But I think that Twice Exceptional absolutely hit the nail on the head as far as the name that they chose for the label. The reason is because, according to Webster's, one of the definitions of exceptional is unusual or not the norm. And I think that is a perfect way to describe 2E children. And why it's such a big issue in homeschooling, and why it makes homeschooling so hard, and why it makes even being out there and being appropriately accepted by society so hard. And it's because you are not the norm. You're unusual. And so when I go to buy a curriculum or a lesson plan or a unit or go to do anything, I have to keep in mind that when this was designed for neurotypical children. This was designed for what we should expect. So if there is a program that says, hey, this is a 4th grade science program, it is perfect for the 4th grader, except if they're gifted. This math program is great. This is how kids learn math. It is absolutely how kids learn math, except if they're gifted. Well, this is the way that children should be developing, and this is the type of peers that they should have. You are right. That is correct. Except if they're gifted. And then we start to pile on their learning disabilities. So we go back to looking for a reading program, and they say, this reading program is perfect. This is how children learn to read. That is true. Except if they're dyslexic. Okay, here's a handwriting program. It's going to give you this. This is how children learn to write. That is true. This is how children learn to write. Except if they're dysgraphic. And so everything you're looking at, everything you face, it's except your kid. Now, it's hard enough when that except your kid is gifted, or except your kid has slow processing speed. But with Twice Exceptional, those excepts are then exponentially multiplied, because you will get a program that's designed for gifted kids, and you know what? It was created with gifted kids in mind, except if they have dyslexia. And this program, it was created specifically for children with dyslexia, except if they're gifted. And so you start to realize that in order to meet the needs of your child, you are going to have to put together a Frankenstein of a program that you have to build by taking this piece from that, and this piece from the other, and this piece from over here. And then in the end, you finally get something that was created for your child, and you had to do it yourself because everybody else had the average in mind, and the average works great except for your kid. The normal works great except for your kid. The expected works great except for your kid. And if it wasn't hard enough that you have to pretty much go it alone in designing and creating and implementing an educational track for your kid, then comes the pushback from other people who don't like the accept. It's kind of like people I know just recently we had in Japan, there was the first, I'm not in Japan, but we as a humanity got to see the first black Miss Japan. And it was like, people were like, well, how can a black person win Miss Japan? Because she's Japanese. Like, she is Japanese, like, really. And that pushback, that like, wait a minute, that's not what Japanese looks like. And we see that if, somebody wins Miss Black America and they're, half black and white, that's not what Miss Black America looks like. Or if, for a long time, if a black or a Mexican or Asian American won Miss America, that's not what Miss America should look like. That's what happens with 2E children. Because a lot of times, even when you're going into a program, people don't want to accept that there's this other way. There's this diversity in gifted that can make people uncomfortable. I know that there is a lot of pushback with providing accommodation for learning disability for gifted children. And I liken it to people who get angry when Olympic athletes go to transition to the Olympics, the non-Paralympics. And so a lot of times we see this the most in like track, where somebody has a prosthetic limb. And then people say, well, that is going to give them an unfair advantage. And you go, okay, how is leveling the playing field giving an unfair advantage? So you're saying that allowing somebody to have a prosthetic so they have 2 legs is giving them an unfair advantage over somebody who has been training with 2 legs their whole life, and it's not being willing to accept that somebody can be both, and that somebody can be an elite athlete and be physically disabled. And that's what happens with gifted children that have learning disabilities. How people will get angry if a gifted child is given extra time on a test, or a gifted child is given an audio version of the test, or has somebody reading the test to them, or is able to use a computer to write their answers because they're dysgraphic. People say, well, that's an unfair advantage. Why? So leveling the playing field is unfair. And I think that pushback comes from the idea that people have that dyslexic, dysgraphic, slow processing, sensory, auditory processing, ADHD, that means you're broken. And a child that is complete should always be a child that is broken. That's really where it comes from. The idea that if you have a child that has no disabilities and they get a score that's not as high as a child that does have a disability, that something is wrong. Because a broken gifted child should never perform at the level of an unbroken gifted child. Which that's not the case, because they're still gifted. And they are everything that comes with gifted. Just like no one would say, okay, well, that child came in here in a wheelchair, and because they didn't walk in here on their own 2 legs and they scored higher than my child, then obviously that's an unfair advantage. Because an audiobook for a gifted child is not giving them an advantage over other people. It's leveling the playing field. Allowing a dysgraphic child to type their answers rather than write their answers is not giving them an unfair advantage. It's leveling the playing field. But it is uncomfortable for people who perceive a child that has a disability as being broken and being less than and being not as good as. That messes with their perception if, when they are properly accommodated, they perform as will be expected for a child with their IQ, or as will be expected for any gifted child. But the pushback doesn't just come from the gifted community. The pushback also comes from the community of individuals that have learning disabilities as well. I see people who will express frustration that, wait a minute, your child is not performing below grade level. Why should any services be going to your child when they're not struggling? And the 2E parent will say, well, but my child could perform at a higher level with proper accommodation. They're like, no, we're not trying. Why should your child get to excel? They are doing good enough, and they're dyslexic and they can pass the test. Why are you pushing it? Because it's not just about passing the test. It's not just about getting an acceptable score. It's about allowing my child to see how high they can soar. It's about allowing my child to see exactly where they are. It's about allowing us to get feedback on my child's ability uninhibited by their disability. And the same people who would say your child should not be allowed to get accommodation because they're also gifted, they would never say, well, you know what, my child is in a wheelchair and they can't move their legs at all, and so I don't think that child should be allowed to have crutches because one of their legs work. And so since one of their legs work, they can walk twice as good as my child where none of their legs work. And so why should they get a crutch? No one would say that. But people will freely say that a gifted child should not get accommodation for their areas of disability because that's not fair. They should be with me. We should all be at the same level of this if we all have this same title. And that's what makes it so hard for 2E parents, because you are constantly being told that you're not gifted. Those kids aren't gifted enough because they have this disability that is in no way related to giftedness. Or they're being told they're not disabled enough because they can compensate for part of their disability because they're gifted. And so we shouldn't help them at all because they don't look as dyslexic as my kids. They don't look as dysgraphic as my kids. Their processing speed doesn't look as slow as my kids. So therefore, they should get no accommodation because that might make them look gifted. They should get no accommodation because that might have them score as well as my kid. And so that is why so many parents, 2E parents, hide. Because there's so few places where you get to be open and honest. And having 2E kids, you get the type of I don't know if anybody has ever been in a situation where people where you'll say something and somebody will say first world problems. Like, really? Okay, those are first world problems. Basically saying there are people who are starving and you are sitting up here and you're crying because you twisted your ankle. Come on now. Somebody just got their leg amputated yesterday and you're crying over a twisted ankle. As if because your pain isn't as bad as somebody else's pain, your pain is not valid. And that is what happens with parents of 2E children. You are hushed and put in a corner and said to not ever say anything because your pain is not as bad as somebody else's pain. And you're given no opportunity to say, but it hurts. I'm not saying that my pain is anywhere near the pain of someone who's got their leg amputated, but my ankle still hurts and I still need somebody to help me wrap it, and I still need to be able to keep it elevated, and I still need to have access to ice so I can ice it. I still should be able to get those things even while the person with the amputation is being treated. And you know what? I will even accept that I get, you don't have to wrap my ankle while somebody who's with an amputation is still actively bleeding. I'll wrap my own ankle. Can I have access to the material so that I can wrap it? And that's what happens with a lot of 2E families, is you have to become the expert, because nobody's willing to deal with your child because they're not that broken. And you have to become the advocate, because other people, in a gifted program, they're like, oh, why is your child here? Okay, when your child wrote a report on the solar system, they misspelled misalignment. Like, really? And you want them to be in this program when they can't spell misalignment? And you're going, okay, my child is 7 and they know what planetary misalignment is, and you're saying that they shouldn't be allowed in the program because they misspelled a word that most children their age don't even know what it is, and can't describe it, and can't define it, and can't explain it. And so you end up constantly fighting for access, acceptance in the gifted world, fighting for access and acceptance in the learning disability world, and fighting for acceptance of your duality in society in general. And it makes it hard. It makes it tough. It makes it extremely lonely. Very, very lonely. And that's why I started my channel. That's why I speak out on the things that I do. That's why I take the hits and take the shots. And that's why I have to be okay with people saying, oh my goodness, our kids ain't all that. Or, all the other stuff. I take the hits because I'm trying to make it not so lonely for other parents of 2E children. And my children are brave. And they put themselves out there. And they have their channel up. And they show their stuff. Just so that other 2E kids can see that there's people like them. And it doesn't have to be so lonely. Even though they get hits, even though people come after my kids and say terrible things about them, they still keep going, because somebody has to be brave. Somebody has to put on the light in the lighthouse and let people know that we have a place, we have a voice, and we're ready to welcome with other arms people that also fight this battle and are on this journey. So I hope this helps in introducing you to a little bit of the diversity in the gifted community. And hopefully it will open some eyes to be a little bit more accepting of the diversity that's in the gifted community. This is Dr. J, and I'm out. Bye-bye.